We're continuing Overcoming Worldliness by the outline by Mr. Heath Rogers. And tonight we're going to deal with, I've been helping out with this. I hope, and I'm sure Brian hopes as well, that throughout this quarter, as we've hit on different topics of worldliness and overcoming those, that maybe not every single one of those has resonated with you personally as a problem that you might have. I'll admit, I'm not trying to toot my horn, but did gambling shake my world? The topic, I don't do much gambling. And these days I don't dance a whole lot. And thankfully, one good thing about being overweight, you tend to keep clothes on, so you're not, being modest is not an issue for me typically either. But this one, as you see up here, well, no, you don't see it yet. Let's get with the program.
All right, so you got the side button?
Yes, sir.
Push it up.
Which one there? I see two side buttons.
On the left side.
Okay, left side. Push it up. Oh, slide it up.
Yeah.
There we go. All right.
Do you see the blue dots?
There we are. We're right on it now. Sinful speech. We just wanted to have a little drama before we revealed it. No, this one, now listen. And some of you don't have a problem with that. Some of you don't. Now, admittedly, when we talk about sinful speech, that is a pretty broad topic, isn't it? I dare say nobody sitting here or back there or in the world pretty much has not had an issue with sinning with their mouth at some point, right? You would be really an extreme, unusual person if you never sinned with your mouth, okay? We're going to focus more tonight on more like foul language and that sort of thing. That is not as big a problem for some people. For others, it is a big problem, okay? And we'll talk more about that here. But let's get into the kind of the broader term first, and then we'll break it down into the different types of foul language, and we'll also look at hopefully, obviously, overcoming this problem that many of us have, or the temptation to sin is there for many people. But we're gonna look at a few different things here. Before we get into the first type of sinful speech, I will say this. Let's read what the Bible says about it here. It says, let's go to, if you want to read along with me, Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21. And it says, Solomon said, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." And Jesus warned here in Matthew chapter 12, verses 36 through 37, and we'll look at some other verses nearby that same passage. But if you want to follow along, go to Matthew 12, verses 36 and 37. This is a frightening thought. It's a frightening thought when you read this passage. It says, Jesus here talking, "But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." That is powerful and frightening, isn't it? We talk about it. We talk about what people do, what they believe. But Jesus here, he's talking about your words. And we'll look a little bit more at why your words are such a crucial thing to Jesus. And when it comes to sinning or not. We'll look at that more, but that right there should be reason enough for all of us to say, yeah, this is something I need to be very concerned about. We see in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, back a little bit before 36 and 37, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." And Mr. Rogers, Heath, I'm going to call him Heath from now on. There's only one Mr. Rogers, right? Right. Heath said, I don't know, Heath maybe, we'll say the author of the outline, we'll call him. That sounds a little too informal, Heath. I don't know the man. But he, in his outline, points this out, and this is very true. The tongue is all too willing to reveal the true nature of man's heart, right? And that's the thing that a lot of us, when we look in the mirror, because when we come down here, hopefully not too many people have heard bad language out of us in this building, right? Because most of us, as soon as we get on property, we're going to be pretty careful about what we're saying, right? But and I live out in the country a ways, right? So it can be good or bad when it comes to what you're saying out loud, right? Because sometimes you feel like, well, yeah, I can say what, if I want to yell at Emma, I can yell as loud as I want, right? I'm not saying in an abusive way, but let's say she's out 100 yards, no, don't let her get that far. Let's say 50 yards away from the house. But also sometimes when I've been angry, I've said some things pretty loudly, and later I thought, man, I hope nobody was coming up to the door especially somebody from church coming up to say hello or something. If they might have heard what I was, and my voice tends to carry as it is. So I'm sure I'm not alone in that, right? But maybe I am alone. If so, so be it. So that's just kind of a general, but before we get into the breakdown of the types of speech we're going to look at, I do want to point out some verses here that can help us, again, kind of have a greater appreciation for how Christians are supposed to speak. If you look at Titus chapter 2, verse 8, the speech of a Christian should be sound. It should be sound. And sound is kind of a broad term. It can mean a lot of things, but it should be sound. If you look in 2 Corinthians, you don't have to necessarily look at these. I'm going to go pretty quickly through them, but if you wish, that's fine. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12 says that our speech is to be gracious and seasoned with salt. And on 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 11, this is a dramatic saying. In fact, I think I spoke about this. I asked who's the Oracle of Omaha here like a month or so ago, trying to be, real clever. And I think Brian nailed it right away. But we'll ask him after class if you don't remember who that is. But we're to speak as the oracles of God. That's a heavy responsibility right there. And then lastly, of course, this is one we're very familiar with. Ephesians 4, verse 15 says we're to speak the truth in love. In all these things that we're speaking here about how we're supposed to speak, sinful or foul speech isn't among those, are they? So, but here's what we're going to look at, breaking down, and then I'm going to look very quickly, just go through very quickly, how you can overcome them. Because who knows, sometimes I don't always get through a lesson, sometimes I finish with plenty of time, sometimes I don't. But I want you to at least hear what these points are, but we'll come back and try to hit all of them. But the type of things we're going to look at, we're going to look at corrupt words. Corrupt words. Again, that's a bit of a broad term, but it is a type of sinful speech. Filthy talk. Filthy talk is another type of bad words or whatnot that we'll look at. Profanity. It's a little bit, we don't have the gentleman, I forget, what's his name, the fiance of Judy. What's his? Art. Yes, Art. Remember how you pointed out the difference between nakedness and nudity, right? Yeah. Well, people can kind of get a little bit confused, or sometimes it can kind of mean different things. Profanity versus vulgarity, or cursing, or cussing, or foul. There's a lot of things that you can say that kind of mean the same, but sometimes not quite the same. And speaking of that, we're also going to look at euphemisms. One word in place of another, or term in place of another. And are those tricky? Are those problems sometimes too? We've talked about that before. I remember distinctly, it may have been a lesson, I don't remember if it was a sermon or lesson, but I think it was a lesson in a Bible class. And Brian touched on this is probably 2 or 3 years ago. And he talked specifically about euphemisms and stuff. But we'll look at that further. But before we get into corrupt words, let me just very quickly, because I want to get them all out there. Let's very quickly, I'll tell you what the 7 ways, just very quickly in brief topics, that you can overcome corrupt speech, profanity, foul language, etc., etc. 1, learn to think before you speak. We'll look at that more closely. Learn to think before you speak. That's a big problem for a lot of us, right? I tend to a lot of times I'll speak before I think. Remember the power of your words. Remember the power of your words. And I hate to say it, but a lot of times your negative words punch more powerfully than your good words, right? What do they say? One bad word can offset like 3 or 4 other good praises to a child or somebody. True. 3, seek to edify others with your speech. So we're not just looking at how we can avoid the bad stuff. We can replace it with something good, right? Kind of like eating bad, unhealthy food, we can eat good stuff. Same way here, we can fill our vocabulary with good words and edifying things. Also, honor others with your speech. honor others with your speech. There'll be a prayer request I'll have at the end of class tonight when we traditionally do that, about somebody who passed recently on Valentine's Day, that I've heard a lot of people honoring him with their words. Someone that was had a big impact on my life. I'll mention it later a little more. But honor people with your words. Also, learn to live in God's presence. Learn to live in God's presence. A little hint on that. He hears everything we say. He hears everything we say. Doesn't matter if you're out in the country or not. He can hear it. And then also, number 6, pray. Pray for God's help. We'll see where David prayed for God's help with speech and how he spoke. And then lastly, keep your heart pure. As we have said here, that heart is revealed through your speech. And so if your heart is pure, who's perfect? But yes, there are different degrees, and we can try to seek for better purity in our heart. The more we have that, the less likely we're going to have that stuff spill out that sometimes, does spill out and embarrasses us and betrays us and reveals things to us that sometimes we need to look at more closely. All right, let's go to the beginning, the first subtopic we'll call it, and that's corrupt words. This could be considered cussing, dirty words. The doctrine of Christ, as the author points out, it just flat out prohibits this. You're not to be using that kind of language. Let's look here at Ephesians. Somebody thought I wasn't going to get on this. Corrupt words, Ephesians 4:29. All right. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearer. So again, that's something that we want to strive for, and we don't want to violate. Let's go down to the next little subtopic. This is a Greek word, sapros, I'm assuming. Sometimes I'll go online and I'll actually listen to them pronounce it. I didn't do that tonight. I'm hoping sapros is close to it. First I said sapros, sapros sounds a little more Greek. Sapros is more like South Georgia, right? But in any event, it means corrupt. Basically, it's if you translate that, it's corrupt, and even more specifically, rotten, worthless, unfit for use. Now, again, this kind of term for words or speech, it can cover a lot of things. The author points out gossip, lying, disrespectful talk, false doctrine. There's a lot of ways that you can speak in a corrupt manner with corrupt words, okay? But again, we're going to focus more on these foul words that do not edify in any way. Let's go to the next one here. Again, they're rotten, they're worthless, and they corrupt those around you. I'm going to go ahead and say this about cursing, I think Brian, even just this Sunday, he said it's not really cursing unless it's more cussing or foul, abusive language. That's what I'm talking about now. Growing up as a kid, I didn't really use foul language much. I might have said something off color here and there, but I didn't curse, so to speak. I didn't cuss. Until, I'll tell you when I started cussing some. And it was through anger and frustration. It was probably about 10 or 11 years old. And that's why I look at soccer as a communist sport. No, I'm kidding. But I was on a soccer team. And for whatever reason, the mix, and I've been on a lot of sports teams, not lately, but in my younger days. And usually I had a good cohesiveness with my fellow teammates. But on this soccer team, maybe it's because I was kind of new to the sport. I never played it again, I'll tell you that, after this season. But for whatever reason, there was a clashing there. And they were cursing a lot. And some of them were a bit older than me, and we started butting heads, so to speak. And I found myself cursing at them. So they were cursing, I started cursing, you know what I'm saying? And it was, what it was born of? Anger and frustration. I resorted to that. I hate to say it, but I resorted to using, even I really hadn't used that kind of language. I started doing it because I was around, they had a corrupting influence on me. And I allowed myself, through my frustration and anger, I started doing it back at them, you know what I'm saying? And so that, I'm not saying I was like a serial, cusser after that, but I really probably never said a cuss word before that, for whatever that's worth. But it has a corrupting influence on those around them. All right, let's go on to the next type of bad words or speech that we're going to look at. Filthy talk. Filthy talk. Let's look at Ephesians 5, 3, 4. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 3 and 4. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. You know, we're as Christians, we're not, obviously, we know this. We know it, but yet it still happens, right? Christians aren't supposed to be, fornicating. They're not supposed to be lewd and coveting and these things that the Bible, prohibits Christians to do, or even decent human beings to do. I think one reason why, though, that even though many of us don't even necessarily do these things, but we sometimes listen to it, especially if you have, how many have satellite radio? Anyone have satellite radio? Okay, that's right, it's not very popular. Okay, well, one thing about satellite radio, I do like it a lot because there's so many things you can listen to. In fact, I hate to say it, when you get spoiled on satellite radio, it's hard to go back to local radio because there's so much, whatever you want to listen to, you can listen to. They've got like literally 6 or 7 channels on XM Sirius Radio just on comics, comedians. Very foul language, extremely bad language. Okay, I don't recommend you listen to it. But people laugh at that stuff, don't they? Admittedly, some of these comedians are extremely clever. They actually know how to put things together, words and ideas, and what makes humor funny, I think. Because sometimes you watch a commercial. I don't know. I didn't watch much of the Super Bowl this year. I didn't really see any commercials to speak of. Well, I'll tell you the truth. The reason why I didn't, our satellite TV took off that channel. The only way I could watch the Super Bowl, 2 ways. One was in Spanish, and I know a little Spanish, but not enough to really, make it interesting to listen to a game being, spoken about in Spanish. And the other one was, you had no view of the game at all. All you heard like some radio broadcast. So if I could put those together in English, I could have actually watched this, but I couldn't. So I didn't even hardly watch it. But some, what the worst offenders are on the silliest, unfunny commercials, in my opinion, around these days are insurance commercials. I'm so sick and tired of insurance commercials. There used to be some good ones back a few years ago. Lately, some of these same characters that keep coming by, I'm not going to say their names, you know who they are. I'm getting so tired of them. Their 15 minutes should be up, But what makes humor funny is an element of truth to it. When you recognize truth that, oh yeah, that's happened to me. But unfortunately, a lot of these comedians, and it appeals to us as humans, just our human nature, is rather than, and I do appreciate the clean guys and women that can do it in a funny way, but clean. But most of them don't do that. And so the reason why we're tempted to be pulled is because it is funny. It is entertaining at times. But it lures you in and it corrupts you. So that's something to think about here. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 12, it says, "For it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret." And what you have a lot of in this filthy talk is people talking about things that are private and shouldn't even be spoken of, and they're just saying it out loud, And we fall prey to that oftentimes. Let's see. And one thing about it here, notice it says, this is the kind of talk that's engaged in by people that don't really care about at least the negative aspect the impact it's going to have on someone else. I don't know if I think I told a little bit of the story here from about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was down in St. Pete, and I was trying to work on something late at night. Do you remember me saying something about that? I think I mentioned that. Maybe it wasn't in a lesson. I was talking to someone about it. And it was literally like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm trying to work on this thing pretty feverishly. And I could hear literally into my buddy Shannon's house, I could hear from across a canal, a party going on, and there was lots of drinking, and I could hear these people cursing out loud, extremely loud. In fact, I put stuff in cotton in my ears just to try not to hear it. Finally, I resorted to turning on some music or something just so I could drown it out. Those people didn't care at all the impact they were having on other people. I don't know that it corrupted anyone, frankly, because I think anyone that actually heard it was so irritated by it happening at 1 o'clock in the morning. But I was shocked. Nobody called the police. Nobody stopped it. I would have called the cops, but I didn't because I was afraid if they knew where that call came from, my buddy Shannon, that those people across the canal might come over there and try to start trouble. So I didn't reach out to the law. But if I ever go back and it happens, actually I've heard it twice when I was there. And I talked to Shannon's wife about it. They do that at every. It was what is it? Gasparilla? Is that what they call it down there? The big festival in Tampa. What is it? The Pirate Festival or something? Is that Gasparilla? That was going on that weekend. So they were having their own Gasparilla across the canal. But they do it apparently every time there's a big weekend. So anyway, there's a lack of caring about how this impacts other people. It includes dirty jokes. We've already talked about that sort of thing. Let's go on to another type of dirty talk, you might say, or bad words. Profane. Now again, we talked about a little bit how you can use different terms, vulgarity, profanity, cursing, whatever. According to Webster's New World Dictionary, the word profane means showing disrespect or contempt. I can get this up there actually. Disrespect or contempt for sacred things, to put to a base or improper use. So a lot of times people use the term profanity, no profanity allowed, in school and all that. And yes, in a broad sense, profanity can include all kinds of cuss words. But as the author of the outline points out, it really most especially refers to using the name of God in vain. That's what it really, profanity, and usually it does a lot of times include some other words with it, right? The vanity of using God and then something that comes after it, right? There's something else that usually is associated with it, but not entirely. We'll look at that in just a minute. God left very clear instructions on how we're supposed to use his name. Let's go to, I'll just quickly, Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. And when you say what's in vain, it means in a common, empty or careless manner, showing lack of reverence. It shows a careless attitude. Let's look at Leviticus chapter 24, verse 16. I'm going to go ahead and just read straight out of the Bible on this one. I have other passages. This one I wanted to read straight out of the Word here. 24, verse 16. Just to remind ourselves of how God viewed his name being used improperly in Old Testament times. And whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall certainly stone him, the stranger as well as him who is born in the land. When he blasphemes the name of the Lord, he shall be put to death. A lot of us are very thankful, I think, that we did not live at that time, right? Well, maybe we would have had a different attitude if we did, right? But I think a lot of us have been guilty at some time or another of blaspheming God's name. And if it had been a different time and place, we wouldn't put to death, And just think about how it's used now in vain so often. And a lot of people, the author points out that we do live in a different covenant now, under a different covenant. But it is the same God who pronounced that. Let's go to Hebrews. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 12. And we'll read verses 28 and 29 of chapter 12 of Hebrews. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. And this is a good reminder right here, 29. For our God is a consuming fire. Okay? So, while we may not literally be put to death, well, no, I guess if you go to the Middle East and use their God's name in vain, I imagine you may literally be put to death. But there could be danger regardless, right? Our God, we can have eternal damnation for this sort of thing that we continue to do. This is a problem I think a lot of us deal with, and we're going to get to euphemisms here in just a moment. But what's used a lot now with texting and stuff? What is it? These acronyms people use, right? These acronyms. The author points out a few of these acronyms. I've not really ever used this one. Who can tell me what TTYL means?
Talk to you later.
Okay, I've never used that one. And I haven't seen it. If I saw it, I didn't know what I was looking at, I guess. I'm not real familiar with that one. It makes sense. Here's another one. Well, everyone knows this one. LOL. Someone said love, not love. Laugh out loud. Laugh out loud. That's a very common one. I'm very familiar with that. BTW. By the way, that makes a lot of sense. And that's not, by the way, I can't imagine anyone being offended by that, right? But here's the one that we see a lot. And here's the thing though. As I was
Seriously, Greg, OMG.
But you know, you said, I thought about, should I even say that out loud? Because I had already gotten ahead to euphemisms and stuff, right? You know, it can be tricky, right? I mean, but yes, what he just said, and we all knew that. He didn't have to say it. We all knew in our minds, you formed in your mind what was next, right? And that is so common now. I think there's brands out there with that terminology, right? I think there's LOL dolls, but there are also some of these other things in other products and stuff. It is so, and the sad thing is, if you get on Facebook, you get on Twitter, et cetera, you'll see even people that name Christ as their master who are using sometimes this same sort of thing. They fall into it, you know? They still fall into it. That's one we should not be using. That is in vain. And someone said, well, I don't mean God in that last word. Well, again, we're going to talk about euphemisms here in a minute. Even if you don't mean that, I'm not saying, we'll talk more about that.
Well, just real easy, Greg, there's another 3 letters you can use in place that for a long time had the similar meaning. The word was wow.
Yeah.
W-O-W.
Right. You can expect that's a clean one, no problem. That's not even a euphemism for anything bad. Right. There's a lot of what it is. It's because so many people in the culture don't care a thing about using God's name in vain at all. Doesn't bother them at all. And so, but unfortunately, a lot of people have started falling right in line with that. There's no doubt. I will say this. God's name does have an impact on seemingly everybody, because there's a reason they do pick that name, right? They don't say, oh my shoe, you know, or, well, I guess oh foot or something is a word. Oh, what is it?
Oh my goodness.
Right, and now, that's a tricky one. I think you're clear on that one. Someone might argue that's a euphemism to some degree. It can get very tricky, okay? We'll talk, well, let's just go into euphemisms here. We're right on the edge of it here. Let's look at, what is a euphemism? Somebody tell me what a euphemism is. You know, what, I got way behind here. There's some different scripture euphemism. What is a euphemism?
When you use something that's accepted in a good sense to replace something bad.
Exactly. Substituting, taking a bad word, but don't use that. Use something sanitized to some degree. Something that's at least socially acceptable. In reality, in most social circles, the name of God in vain or even these other bad words are not, a lot of people don't even care, okay? But among decent people that are a little old-fashioned, and Christians, hopefully, you will choose these euphemisms typically, or hopefully you will. Some don't care. And this is where, again, the author he said that what these euphemisms, and you can, in your mind, you're thinking of them right now, right? He calls it, some people have called it Christian cussing. Now, I haven't heard it termed that way exactly, but he says some people call it Christian cussing. I've not heard of it, maybe so. He lists a whole bunch of them here. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm some prude who's so perfect and I never say bad things, and you all are thinking euphemisms, you want to say euphemisms out loud. But I actually thought as I was reading, I said, do I really want to say these out loud? Because if they are euphemisms of something worse that we're not supposed to be saying, should I be saying them out loud? So I will say this about them. They tend to have the same first letter as what you're avoiding saying, right? Be that G, J, C, JC, D, S, right? There's a whole bunch of them here. Here's something, I will say this, and I referred to Brian's earlier lesson about this. I'm of his mind with what he said there at that time, if he remembers. He said, first start trying to eliminate the real bad ones that you're actually using and shouldn't, be using clearly, right? And then, maybe then you can take it to the next level and eliminate these others. But start off first, getting rid of the things that are very clearly the words that we should not be saying. And then as far as euphemisms, yeah, maybe someone might even describe it this way. Although, I like some other things we've talked about this quarter, I'm kind of on I'm in the position of, well, it's kind of a gray area. It may be dangerous, and just be advised. I would say this: if you can avoid using euphemisms that might be attached to something that's sacred, then just try to do that, right? But I am, again, I agree with Brian with what he said. Maybe you can correct me if you didn't say this. I mean, a lot of us still find ourselves sometimes using the wrong term that we know clearly is wrong, right? And so let's get rid of those, and we can work on getting better at getting rid of the other things as well. So euphemisms, that's something that now, and again, when we talk about even using these euphemisms, again, it's not just using God's name in vain. It's also cuss words, okay? Because there are euphemisms for that as well. Like, I'm going to say this one if you don't mind. I'm going to spell it. D-A-R-N. Oh, D-A-R-N, right? That seems very wholesome, doesn't it? It's like a 1950s, Leave It to Beaver moment, right? But what does D-A-R-N stand for in the euphemism world? Yeah, right. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go crazy. You say that word, but it's interesting to think about that, to go through your language in these different terms and realize that if you trace it far enough, you can see that these things are really just kind of substituting. Now the author, listen, you've heard me say this before as we've gone through this course. The author, he says that using these euphemisms is a sin. He says it is a sin. Okay, now again, I'm just putting it out there. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to judge whether if you go out of here and you use the term D-A-R-N that you have sinned. I'll leave it to God to judge. But it is a question mark. At nothing more, it is certainly a question mark. So something we need to take seriously. So, it is interesting too. I was thinking about this sense of using bad language and stuff like that. Some people don't struggle with it. Like I think about, and everyone can say, no, everyone cannot say this about their mother. But a lot of us could, right? I don't think I ever heard my mother utter a cuss word throughout my whole life. I don't believe I ever heard her say anything that would qualify as a cuss word. I heard my dad a few times, yeah. Never heard my mother at all. So somebody that's great. I would like to aspire to that. I'll tell you the truth. It's interesting, and I don't know what triggers some of you. And some people, again, I may be talking to like everyone, but maybe one or two people in here that have no problem whatsoever with ever uttering bad words or bad language or foul language. And even, by the way, it's not always just a cuss word. There's some pretty mean language that you can use that is not necessarily a cuss word, but it's what I think Brian has called abusive. It's abusive tone to it and stuff. When I most am tempted to cuss nowadays, interestingly? It's when I'm mad or frustrated with myself. For some reason, my brain thinks it's okay if I'm cursing at myself. I'm talking about out loud. I'm not talking about just in my mind. I'm talking about saying it out loud and probably at a yelling loudly. I will do that to myself. So that's why I say, if you ever come around where we live and you hear me say, that may be me expressing frustration with something stupid I've done. Something foolish, something I regret doing, etc. Or again, frustration. You will, and I want to stop doing that. I'm not saying I do it all the time, but I'm not going to lie. I do that sometimes. Yes, it's triggered by frustration or anger. I'm not one that really tends to use cussing just in a casual way. I've been around some people before, and they'll just cuss. Just they're happy. They're not. They just cuss out. It's like it's part of their vocabulary. And the thing that the author put together in his outline early on in the outline, he said it's amazing how so many people now, even, and I'm sure I'm talking to a lot of people that can remember the 1950s, 60s, et cetera. And you didn't have people out in public using all this nasty language and stuff like that. But now it's amazing where you'll go. And I'll be standing there, I don't know about you, I've been so angry at times, sitting there with my little 6-year-old daughter, and some person standing next to her cursing to his friend or something, just cussing, and I'm like, I want to go over there and slam him, I'm sitting there using that kind of language, and I guess if I had more guts, maybe I would say, hey, stop using that language. I may have done it once or twice. I think, but in any event, but then again, do I use it sometimes? Has someone overheard me use it maybe one time or two, and they thought that was unacceptable, and so that guy's a real, listen to him over there. I'm not saying I do that a lot, but I'm having maybe somebody drive by and heard me. I don't know. All right, let's look at ways that we can overcome this. Any questions or remarks before we go into how we can keep from doing these things? Any statements or questions? All right, let's go on to those 7 areas. Let's learn to think before you speak. That is a big one. And that's, of course, big in interpersonal relationships. Let's look here real quick at Proverbs 15:28. The heart of the righteous studies how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours forth evil. I think there's some other, especially Old Testament language, that talks about the fool, what the fool says that comes out of his mouth, and that sort of thing. It's one of those things where somebody who just wants to react and going on emotion, or they're irritated, they don't take time to stop. I have oftentimes, and again, it's not always just cursing or using foul language. Sometimes it's just saying something that is mean to somebody, unnecessarily mean, not helpful to the situation. I've done that many times. Maybe you have as well. James chapter 1, verse 19. Let's look. I want to read that straight from the Bible. Let's go to James chapter 1, verse 19. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. That right there, if we would just follow that, and like when I'm frustrated sometimes and I give in to that urge to want to say something bad, if I would think about that and slow down, stop, because again, for me and probably other people, there's a wrath there that's connected to the bad words a lot of times. Let's go on to another approach here. Remember, number 2, the power of your words. We already talked about how in Matthew 12, verses 26, 27, you're going to have to answer for every idle word. Another thing I've been guilty of, maybe you've had the same problem. Sometimes when I get with a friend that I know really well, and even we're both Christians, but sometimes we joke a little. You kind of joke a little, and you're not necessarily using cursing language, but you kind of say something that's really not so great that you said it, but you kind of say, well, I'm joking, I'm just joking. I don't really mean that, you know what I'm saying? Something to think about, something to think twice, the power of what you're saying, In Proverbs 18:21, it has the power to determine the fate of your soul. The language you use has the power to affect your eternal soul. That's something, like I said, that's something I need to think about whenever I'm tempted to say something I shouldn't. I need to stop. Okay, don't do that. Here's on the positive side, way that we can fill in that void, so to speak, in our language, our vocabulary maybe, in a positive way. Let's look at, again, we'll go back real quick to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Right? I mean, why not look for ways to say good things about people? Maybe even when you're tempted and frustrated and want to say something bad, you say, wait a second, I'm going to experiment here. I'm going to see if I can't go the opposite way. And I'm going to say something that will bless somebody. Even if I'm talking to myself, right? Remind myself of a good scripture or something, and instead of being frustrated and saying something bad. Honor others with your speech. How often, and this is really true, you know what they say about, one of the most powerful things, an impact you can have on somebody that you know, is if they find out that you were praising them when they weren't around. Have you ever had that happen? It hasn't happened too often, but it's happened occasionally. Has it happened to you where you found out somebody had said something about you, and instead of something bad, they were actually praising you. They were giving you a compliment to somebody else, and you weren't even around. That's That's pretty crazy considering how much we often say bad things about people when they're not around, right? To me, that's, you talk about temptation to speak in an ungodly manner. One of the biggest temptations is that people, we so want to talk about other people. We want to run them down a little bit to make ourselves feel better about our own shortcomings. Another way, live in God's presence. We didn't really get to it, but in Psalms, David talks about it, says, "For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether." And then he says in Psalm 19:14, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer." He's hearing it all. He knows our thoughts too, right? So you really can't escape. But he's definitely hearing our words. And, well, both. He's hearing both. But think about it. Think about that. David thought about it, and it modified his behavior. And then pray for God's help. God prayed. He said, this is to me a very powerful verse here. "Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips." I need that sometimes. I need to think of that as a guard around my lips. Just say nothing. Don't say anything if you can't say something good. And then lastly, as I mentioned, keep your heart pure. We'll finish. I said we would come back to Matthew 12 and the earlier verses around 33, 35 or so. We'll read that and we'll be done. "Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or else make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For a tree is known by its fruit. Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things." That right there should be enough for me to, when I am tempted to say something bad, even if I'm talking to myself out of frustration, to not be using bad language ever. So, just something to think about here, and hopefully it had an impact on you like it's impacted me as well. Like I said, some other things didn't apply to me so much, but this one does to some degree, and so I wanted to be somewhat transparent in that, and then also it will motivate me. So thank you. And I did get behind it. As they come in, well, this is just entertainment as they come in. Wow, I did miss a lot, didn't I? But those are the ways you can. There we go. All right.
But only if I know the number. Big book. Big book. All right, big book. I'll fly away. $8.51. We doing first and last, or all three? All right. It's what's called song leader prerogative. Do keep in mind announcements that I'm thinking of. Do continue to keep Denise Crawford in prayer. Services for Donnie will be on Saturday at Fellowship Baptist in Rayford. Anybody remember what the time is on that one? 2 visitation and 3 o'clock for the service. So, what else do we have that's not already listed in the bulletin? Yes, sir.
My grandpa's not feeling good today.
Okay. Yeah, Mark was having some sinus and light issues, so he stayed home tonight. Yes, sir.
Well, a couple of Tom could get this already, but we talked about Sue Lawler.
Yes.
They feel pretty close to passing. I saw and talked to her son yesterday passing through town, and he said it seems very close. So just keep that family in your prayers. Also, I alluded to it earlier in the Bible class. My former high school football coach, a gentleman by the name of Gerald Odom. Some of you may remember, if you're a Gator fan, his son Jerry was a linebacker for the Gators. in the late 80s, early 90s. He passed away at 82 on Valentine's Day. And I'm just asking you to keep his family in prayers. He positively affected many young men's lives over a long, long coaching career. So I just want to let you know.
All right. What else do we have to be mindful of? All right. Tyler and the youth have the building cleaning this week, so I assume you'll be in touch with the youth appropriately.
Already started.
All right. So,
Oh, and by the way, about cleaning, I got it approved that any youth that cleans the building gets volunteer hours.
sweet.
Oh yeah, we gonna be cleaning a lot.
All right. What else do we need to be mindful of? All right. In the mornings, Monday through Saturday, Tyler and I have a spot that we just do on YouTube, and one of the passages for this week that was on there that it kind of struck with me was 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 10 and 11. Because of what it says. And, maybe Brother Greg, maybe you're here tonight and everything Brother Greg covered about our speech, none of it affected you. If it did, please come. I will co-author a book with you, and we will sell it. And, you can have 51%. Because do what?
Of nothing?
Oh no, people buy those. If you had a life where you had conquered those habits and you had a book where you could actually coach people successfully in it and a high success rate, people pay very well for that. People pay through the nose for all kinds of public speaking training and cleaning up your speech and becoming more powerful in your speech. People pay for that, Phyllis. But one of the things that Greg kept coming back to is anger and frustration. How many things in the speech that are triggered by anger and frustration? And 2 Corinthians 2, 10 and 11, the church had some issues against one of the brethren, and the brother repented, and so he was trying to get them to understand about forgiveness. And I want you to see what's going on in these two verses and how this carries all the way across. He says, "Now whom you forgive anything, I also." Someone may sin against someone else. It may not have nothing to do with you. The moment they forgive it to the other person, you're done with it. You're done with it. You say, "Well, brother, it upset me that they did it." You don't get it. You're done with it. If Tyler sins against me and you're upset at Tyler, the moment I say, "Tyler, I forgive you," everybody else, you don't have any right to carry anything for. All right? So, point one. For indeed, if I have forgiven anything, I have forgiven that one for your sakes in the presence of Christ. Forgiveness is for your sake. Forgiveness is for your sake. Forgive it for your own sake. And here's why: lest Satan should take advantage of us. If Tyler sins against me or I sin against Tyler, and let's say young sister Emmy's upset at both of us, and then Tyler and I square up, but now she's still upset with both of us. Don't you understand that where Satan no longer has a way to cause chaos between me and Tyler, he can use that as leverage in the life of Emmy? You see, carrying junk forward for a long period of time gives Satan an advantage. And it may not give an advantage on what it originally triggered. It may spill over into 20 other areas of your life. Because anytime there's a place of unforgiveness and someone's forgiven and someone else hasn't let it go, it gives Satan leverage. It gives Satan leverage. And now I'm going to come down to, for me, what is the most selfish reason in this verse. How many of us in here want to be called ignorant? No, David, you don't want to be called ignorant. All right. All right. So for those who understand the words, how many of you, if someone walks up to you and says, you're ignorant, you're as ignorant as a post in the field? How many of you go, thank you so much? And if you said it and meant it, you know what that'd prove? You're ignorant of the word ignorant. There's enough things where the devil has beat me up in my life. I would rather not be dumb in this one to give him leverage to beat me up even more. And so why forgive? That's for your own sake. It's that you don't give the devil leverage, and it so proves that you ain't ignorant, at least where the devil's concerned in that category. Because how many things in life, and we talk about seeds of anger, we know our society is America is an angry country. America is arguably, possibly the most angry country in the world. Because the one thing in this country that they keep recycling is everyone's sins and failures to keep everybody stirred up emotionally and mad. How many of you now can do anything about what President Biden does? So forgive it. Say, Brother P violated his whatever constitution and blah, blah. Okay. Name me any one president in the last 30 years that ain't done it. Once the election was over, what can you do about it? Nothing. So and I want you to see this. You get mad at that. Then that person that cut you off in traffic. Son, they go 95 miles an hour by the time you got up to 95. The county or the state trooper, they saw you, but they didn't see that guy. Now you're mad at the state trooper because how dare he pull you over when you were just trying to catch that guy up so that you could let him know that he was number one. And now you're mad at the president, and you're mad at that guy, and you're mad at the state trooper, and now you're late for work, and you're mad at that, and blah, 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 blah. You see how the devil gets an advantage? Through unforgiveness and anger. And before the end of the day is over, who else have we been mad at? Who else have we not given forgiveness to that actually matters in our lives? That takes us to places we don't want to go and keeps us there so that when we go to bed, we're agitated, we wake up agitated, and it starts all over again. And I don't know about you. Evan, has anybody ever laughed at you? Do you like it, buddy?
Yes, sir.
You like them laughing with you, don't you?
Yes, sir.
But you don't like them laughing at you.
No, sir.
Of all people I don't want laughing at me, it's the devil. Because he's a punk. And if I'm going to be laughed at, it ain't going to be by no punk. And definitely by no punk devil. And that one's an easy one. Just say, I forgive, and go on. I forgive and go on. And tonight, if you're here, you need to forgive, then forgive. You say, well, they ain't made it right with me in the last 6 months. Well, if you ain't gone and talked to them in the last 6 months, you're part of the problem too. So just forgive and let it go. Just forgive and let it go. Because tonight and any time, there stands a Lord who is ready who forgave and forgave and forgave. And probably not even 15 minutes after they finished dropping him in the hole, while they had him suspended with spikes, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what to do." No animosity on the cross.